My name is Amanda Ring, and this is Flight of the Feminine. Here on Flight of the Feminine, I'm inviting you to explore and reclaim all things feminine, the divine and the dark, to awaken your womb and heart consciousness. I'm inviting you to open to the realms of energy and spirit, to evoke empowerment and create sovereignty. As a sacred soul, each one of you are on this journey through life. Welcome back to Flight of the Feminine. Here on Flight of the Feminine, I'm inviting you to explore and reclaim all things feminine, the divine and the dark, to evolve your womb and heart consciousness, discover the realms of energy and spiritual expansion, and I'm here to stoke your empowerment and sovereignty as a sacred soul. Each one of you are on this journey through life. Today, we are going to dive into the transformative work of creating better boundaries. We're going to have some sharing, some of my personal story, and some practical tips for you towards the end of the episode, so stick around. Now, as a little side note, if you haven't yet had a chance to listen to episode 3, which is called Your Body is Talking, Are You Listening? Be sure to go back and have a listen to that one, as it's going to have great relevance to your boundary work. It was about 15 to 20 years ago, when I was in my mid to late 20s, when I began to actively take my own personal healing and growth work more seriously by going to counseling and various healers for support and guidance. At that point in time, I had just moved to Ireland. I was a brand new occupational therapist. I was completely separated geographically from my family and closest friends, learning a whole new healthcare system and creating a whole new social network for myself. And so a lot of things came to light for me at that point in time. And I decided to reach out, which I'm so grateful that I did. I reached out for support. And if I'm completely honest, in hindsight, I didn't even understand what a boundary was. As a concept, yes, and maybe not even fully. As an action or an embodiment, I didn't really understand that at all. Prior to that, it was more framed in my mind and lived as more of an experience of people's expectations of me and whether I was meeting them or not. And then what that said about my value. The idea or concept of a boundary that could or would protect me in some way, or even better, one that benefited me, was not familiar or really in my conscious awareness. As I began to talk about and explore different challenging experiences I had throughout my life, current relationships and life directions, the choices I'd been making, things I was anxious about and resentful about, the soil of boundary work started to get tilled. I began to realize that many of my own personal boundaries were a one-way flow system. A system that allowed people to receive what they needed and wanted from me, and then the valve closed off. This did for me, and will, if this is you, lead to low-grade chronic fatigue, low-grade chronic anxiety, and a constant striving to give more, to be more, to earn more attention or prove worthiness in order to have the valve open up and something be offered in return. I realized through this personal work, which included traditional counseling and both energy healing work and shamanic work, that I didn't have very strong or healthy boundaries. And that I needed to look at all of that with eyes wide open and to look within myself about that and why I allowed people to treat me the way that they did, and why I offered myself and my energy so willingly, even when it wasn't reciprocated. One of the things you might have heard before, and I share with the women that I work with or in the groups and the gatherings that I facilitate, is a statement that's pretty powerful, that you teach people how to treat you. I teach people how to treat me. So we're leading the way when it comes to our boundaries and what we give and what we receive. So through this process of discovering, that I really needed to look at myself. I needed to go within, this aspect of that feminine curiosity, go within. There were two really big things that were revealed to me that I observed within myself. One was that even though I was very intuitive and insightful from childhood, and I could read a room, I could sense what a person wanted from me without them even speaking, I would start shape-shifting before I even realized I was doing it. So this was one thing. And what that looked like was I would start changing my choices mid-sentence. I would change how I was standing, how I was acting, my tone of voice, all of it. And the other thing I became aware of, and I observed in myself and was observing, I was still doing, I became super aware of, was that I really didn't know how to create a clear, direct, healthy boundary and hold it. I know some of you listening really feel this with me right now. And even sometimes talking about it, it will bring up the resonance of that feeling. It's like a feeling of abandonment and a feeling of being trapped in some way. To add to that second piece of awareness that I had, when I did try to enact a healthier boundary or be clearer about things that I needed and wanted, I often felt a tremendous amount of guilt. It would start to flow in just like somebody was turning on a tap, even mid-sentence as I was trying to share what my boundary was. And I would start unraveling the boundary before the other person could even bump up against it. I knew often intuitively what I needed or wanted or didn't want. I could feel it in my body. It wasn't registering clearly in my awareness. And even when I attempted to put that together, I couldn't execute it. And there's an important piece here that I'm going to talk about in a future episode because it definitely needs at least one, probably more. And that a part of all of this with boundaries and that awareness is connected to worthiness and a sense of our own value. So I'm going to save that for another episode and keep sharing with you here and really jump into some practical aspects of how you can work with creating better boundaries from both my personal and professional experience. In the late 1990s, while I was studying occupational therapy at McMaster University in Ontario, I reached out for support then. And I'll always remember that as I did, I was having the first true awareness of my own level of anxiety. And I think this is key when we're looking at boundary work, because sometimes we can't understand why people keep overstepping our boundaries, but yet we don't have an inner awareness of why they're not strong enough or where that comes from. And my awareness of that I actually had anxiety was a key part of this. I discovered that I actually had anxiety for a long time, but it had never registered with me as anxiety. I didn't see it that way. I realized that I had a pattern of where I would feel what now I could call anxiety. I could and did simply override it and get on with things. And in many of those cases, it was a suppression of it. We could glaze over it. How that pattern was linked to me trying to keep up with all of the expectations people had of me and the ones that I had of myself all contributed to this boundary mess that I found myself in. I felt so trapped. I didn't know how to protect myself. I really, truly didn't know how to ask for what I needed without feeling guilty or like I was hurting someone by standing up for my needs or what made me feel uncomfortable. And this is so prevalent in our culture, especially for girls and women. I didn't know what to do with all of the unsettled feelings I had inside that resulted from this overgiving and the revolving door of fear that swung around every time I even thought of changing things for myself or creating a new boundary or stating it again or trying to embody it again after the first attempt failed. What if I upset the apple cart? Or I injured the hand that fed me, or I offended someone, or I asked for too much, or said no. Maybe you can relate. My value was caught up in there, in that revolving door of fear and lack of boundaries. The good girl syndrome was in full effect. The transactional nature of the world around me felt like a suffocating force, constantly asking me for something first before I could receive. Even if it wasn't apparent in the exchange with someone, I was already primed for loose boundaries, to accommodate, and to abandon myself, to abandon my boundaries. In the energetic realm, this is often described in terms of having an open field where someone you don't even know can walk past and take a little bit of energy. And then the next passerby, and then the next person, and then the next person takes a little. And this is really, really important for you to hear and to refer to my episode 4 around light being, where I talk more about the energy body and the chakras, because this isn't just about our thoughts and our emotions. There's a huge energetic component to this. When you are not aware of your boundaries and or your boundaries are poor, your electromagnetic field is weakened. That can result in seeping out of energy, people being able to siphon your energy. And this also affects the flow rate and the size of your chakras, these energy vortices, these wheels that help process all of the source energy, life force energy that's flowing through you. So just like any other part of our physiological system, if something is impacting the flow of it, it's impacting the whole system, the whole of your being, your whole system's working together in balance and harmony. So when the electromagnetic field is weak, it's creating all kinds of imbalances in your energy field and your body. And those folks that are sweeping past and helping themselves to your energy are often people who are consciously or unconsciously primed as takers. Just like those of you who might resonate with this idea that you're an overgiver. where we're patterned in that. But patterns can be changed. That is something that has been learned. As you go through these different episodes and listening, you might discover you're a taker. And I really want to invite compassion and non-judgment around this. These are patterns we've learned through childhood, through life experience, and through our culture. But we have the power to change them. We have the power to create new patterns. We have to be aware of what we currently are operating within in order to do that. So for those also out there who are familiar with more of the spiritual and energetic terminology, another term people might have heard before and used in relation to this electromagnetic field being opened or weak and people just coming in helping themselves is also called an energy vampire. And energy vampirism is something that, again, can be conscious and unconscious for someone. One way you can tell if your boundaries are poor or your field is weak, or you're spending time interacting with an energy vampire, which could even be someone who is a close friend, a family member, a colleague. After spending time around these folks, you will feel depleted. And it's not just because you've had a long day or there's other things going on. You could have come in and had that already be part of your day, but there's a depletion that feels very different. You can feel a bit disembodied or beside yourself. If you've not been under any stress and been in a pretty good mood and you've spent time within that exchange, you could really feel depleted, energetically spent. Sometimes you can even have a sense of disorientation, feel very unsettled. And some people's experience after being in that environment, you start to feel bad about yourself in some way. Negative self-talk and self-deprecation jumps up a notch when before that you felt fine. The person that you had been spending time with also might reach out and say, oh, they had the best time with you and can't wait to get together again and really wanting to make plans. They might actually feel fully revived after being with you, spending time in your energy. Perhaps you relate to this experience as well. I really also want to be clear, as I have in other episodes, this is not always intentional by those folks. It's their energetic and emotional patterning. And they are very possibly not aware of it. And until you speak to how you feel, share that with them after your self-reflection, they might also remain in the dark to themselves about it. This is a first step in starting to pay attention to your boundaries and how you feel when you think you're standing in your boundary or you're sharing a boundary. How do you feel during it? How do you feel after? What does your body feel like? How are the people you're connecting with feel? And if you're somebody who generally feels depleted all of the time, I mean, of course, there could be some physiological things at play or health issues, and always, of course, consider those and do due diligence and get yourself checked out. But if there is this general fatigue all of the time, really check your boundaries, check in, and check your overgiving. If it's there or if it's in certain circumstances, you want to look at that. So this is a starting point, and being aware of how you feel after spending time with people or having a conversation with people. Notice the patterns in those relationships, and you'll start to be aware of how strong your field is and how strong your boundaries are in those circumstances. I also want to encourage that not only coaching and counseling therapy in the various ways it can be offered these days can be helpful. But shamanic and energy healing work also is so vital. It's really an essential addition to understanding ourselves as whole beings. And it helped me so much to understand more about my energy field and the chakras and how this system was connected to my emotions and my thoughts, and how I would notice and feel certain things in my body and common reoccurring sensations or issues that were related to blocked energy or low energy because of not having proper healthy boundaries, or of not using my voice to share my boundary, or how I used my voice to share my boundaries. It really added a whole other very important and essential layer of understanding, and that helped me empower myself. So I encourage you to consider exploring your boundaries from that perspective as well. When we don't stand in our awareness of our boundaries and be strong within them, we also continue to contribute to the patriarchal programming. As women, we continue to contribute to the patriarchal programming of women to play small, to be predictable, to be disconnected and numb to your own needs and wants. There's a big part of boundary work, specifically for women, that is connected to this. And this patriarchal programming is part of that good girl syndrome. Don't rock the boat. Be predictable. Don't change things up. Do as we need you to do. Show up as you're meant to, as quote unquote the feminine, as the caregiver, as the one who sacrifices all of herself for the needs of others. This is old paradigm, and that is very much still, active in our own psyches, but also active in culture. And we can really only influence the culture surrounding us by changing the culture within us first. And this is a big topic, and we're kind of scratching the surface of it here today, but I really hope you'll find this episode awakening and inspiring to really look at this from that lens as well. How am I contributing to this collective programming when I don't really honor my boundaries and learn about myself and how I create them or don't create them? I will tell you from both personal and professional experience, when you begin to create in thought, word, and action a new set of healthier boundaries, those that have benefited from your poor boundaries will feel it. There is often a pushback, and people might not like or understand this quote unquote change in you. And you'll often hear that this isn't like you. Why are you behaving like this? Have I offended you? These type of comments. This is a bit of pushback, as if what you're doing or this new boundary you're asserting is a bad thing. And I'm here to tell you it's not. It's absolutely not. Why does this happen? Why is there this pushback? Might seem obvious, yet it's also layered. Whether others that you're in relationship with or connection with, in whatever way in your life, whether they are aware of it or not, they have been benefiting from your poor boundaries. And once you start taking responsibility for yourself and stand in what feels okay for you and what doesn't, it means that others have to carry their own weight in some way that they didn't have to before, because you were carrying it. And I know there are so many people relating to this and resonating with this right now. And when I have gatherings and circles and we go on retreat, even in online circles and events that I host, I have something called jazz hands. And I ask the women and participants to say if they relate to somebody and what they're saying, what they're sharing, instead of interrupting them, but letting them know that you're with them and you hear them and you see them. They hold up both of their hands and shake them like the old 20s and 30s jazz dances. So you can imagine, I just feel all these hands raising up and doing the jazz hands as I'm saying this for all you listeners out there. And I highlight this insight for you as something to watch out for and be prepared for, so not to be thrown off and abandon your fresh boundary. When this pushback happens, and it could be very subtle, it could be very dramatic with a flurry of accusations, or it might not happen right away. It might come a few days or weeks later. But when this happens, if you can also use your mindset as a tool and change it intentionally to see this as a way to test your own resolve, to stay your course. This is the universe giving you opportunity to keep the commitment of your boundary for yourself, to value yourself and your preference, to stay the course of your intended boundary. I'm sharing this piece around the pushback that can happen when you change your boundaries, because this is also can work the other way. When someone else is trying to honor their truth with you, or that they've been agreeing to something, whether it's an intimate practice you have with them, or it's been agreeing to pick up their kid from school, or a project they had agreed to do with you, but then they realize that they actually aren't fully committed to it. It's not something that they value like they thought they did. They might come to you and say, I'm changing my mind. What they're doing is changing their boundary. And so you might have a pushback. You might take that personally. You might feel some worthiness issue come up there. And so I invite you to see this and explore it from both sides when someone starts to share a change with you. And really work with cultivating non-judgment and cultivating acceptance of change. And that perhaps there's some benefit, to this not going as you thought it would, not following the set plan. And if we boil it right down, when people do try to come forward with something in an honest way that they maybe didn't know for themselves at first, it is cultivating authenticity for both of you. It is opening the door to an opportunity to be vulnerable, to be more authentic, and to embody your sovereignty. And this is so important. We're meant to change. We're meant to evolve. We're meant to discover things we didn't see before, especially when you're doing the work of self-inquiry, when you really want to live more intentionally. You don't want your patterns ruling you. You want to help shape your life and co-create your life. So with that said, let's just talk briefly about what a boundary actually is. And when you're trying to share a boundary is a statement, not a question. For example, it is not, is this okay with you if I stay until 5 and la, 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 la. Now, I'm not talking about having a conversation with somebody and trying to figure out what the parameters of what your plans are for the night. That's not what I mean. But when you are communicating a boundary, it's typically a statement. It's not a question. A boundary is a choice and it's an action. So it's an action-based choice. An action that's executed by you. And it actually could be a non-action, which is also a choice. So it could be that you choose not to engage in something and you communicate that. That is also an action. You're communicating the choice. So boundaries are statements, they are communicating a choice, and they're action-based. Something else that often gets missed, though, lots of people can get really clear on, I don't want this and I want that. This is not acceptable to me and this is. And even in the way that I said that, there can be a tone of indignation or resentment. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's a key piece that's often missed when they're making their statement or declaring their boundary. And that there's no consequence with their boundary. And I don't mean consequence in sort of the old paradigm term, like a punishment. Many, many people have in their psyche that there's a consequence for your actions, right? And yes, there can be. There's natural consequence to things. If you don't fill up your car, it's not going to run. You don't put gas in it, it's going to be on the side of the road and you're going to run out of gas. There's natural consequence to actions and non-action. But it doesn't have to be a punishment. So a boundary will typically have a consequence when it's crossed or if it's not honored in some way. And this consequence needs to be included in your statement, and it has to be included in the embodiment of your boundary. What that means is that you have to have a follow-through. So your boundary has a consequence if it's crossed or not honored, and a boundary has a follow-through by you, not the other person. I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. When you speak this way, when you yell and turn your back to me, I will leave the room, and this conversation is complete for me. There's an example of a boundary that also includes your choice, your action, and it's also letting the person you're speaking to know what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not, what feels good, what doesn't, and if that isn't honored, what the natural consequence of that will be. And I said I was going to come back to like tone of voice and that. What you will need to really work on is your emotional tone when you're communicating your boundaries. And this isn't always easy, and you won't always get it perfect. And it's not about getting it perfect. You just won't always be able to do this, but it is really, really important to be aware of this and practice it, because this is connected to the worthiness piece. There is no need for sarcasm. There is no need for resentment in your tone. If you can try to be neutral in owning that what you are stating and requesting or declaring is your truth and is what is important to you, and that you're allowed to feel that way and you're allowed to ask for that or state it, then you can own it and you can be in a more neutral state when you say it. Now, you might be being really triggered in the moment, and then that's harder. But if you can take a breath, come into your body for a moment, pause before you speak it, and state it slowly, clearly, and in a neutral tone, it will be heard. Because oftentimes when we come in with a tone or an edge of sarcasm or anger or resentment, the other person doesn't hear us. Their walls are already going up. Oftentimes when we're setting a boundary, you might abandon it because you're afraid the other person thinks you don't care about them, or that you're afraid you're going to hurt their feelings. So you can expand on your boundary a little bit, and I'll give you an example. When you speak this way, when you yell at me and turn your back to me, I will leave the room, and this conversation is complete for me. You and what we're talking about is important to me. I'm willing to come back to this conversation when we can talk calmly and we can look at each other. So that just gives a little bit more juice, depth to how you might communicate a boundary. I'm going to share with you a couple more simple examples I think you can relate to. Then I'm going to jump into some tips, and then we're going to clue things up for today. Here's a few others. I'm planning to leave at 4 p.m. If you're not ready, you will have to find your own drive. I will be leaving the event at 5 p.m. If you want to go with me, then you're welcome. If you want to stay longer, you will need to arrange your own transportation back. I'm really happy to be part of this project. I would like to discuss this part of it. I'm not 100% sure about this part. And if you're not open to that, I'm not willing to get involved at all. So when we start communicating our boundaries, it takes courage. It's requiring courage to speak your truth, right? So some things that can help with this is to get clear on what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to agree to or not, and what your needs are and what your desires are. I'm going to refer you back to episode 3, Your Body is Talking, Are You Listening? Because this episode will help you to discern this through your body wisdom, through your inner wise woman knowing, to help you discern what feels right, what feels aligned or not. Your ego and personal emotional wounds will trip you up every time with boundary work if you only move through this process with your mind and your thoughts. You need your body wisdom, your womb wisdom, and your connection to the somatic sensibilities of your nature. You are a sense-based being, and you need to listen to that as much as what your thought preference is. So get clear on what you're willing to tolerate, agree to, or need, and include your body. You want to state your boundary in as short and concise and clear a manner as possible. This is going to take practice for all of you over-explainers out there. And my invitation is going to be not to over-explain. This is also going to be a place for practice for you who typically fear rejection and conflict. Because most often, the over-explainer and those that avoid conflict immediately start to feel guilty when they don't explain the why. So they don't offend anyone, upset anyone, so that their needs or wants are more acceptable to the person they're communicating with. This is good girl syndrome. But I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, no matter how much you explain it or how you explain it, it won't matter. They are going to have their own perception and own opinion. You cannot change that. You can only embody yourself and your boundary and your truth, and you allow them to work through whatever their internal response is of it. So short, concise, and clear. What will help you with that process is to write the boundary down. Write and say it the same thing over in different ways. And I mean with yourself first, before you share it or declare it. Write it down and say it out loud over and over in different ways. This is my next tip. Practice saying it out loud to yourself in the mirror or while you're driving to work out some of the discomfort and the wobbles that you will have. Remember, your brain and your nervous system doesn't know the difference of something that is actually happening or something you're imagining happening or remembering that happened in the past. So if you're starting to declare a boundary that you've never held before, that you've self-abandoned with a million times, and you're really going to give it your all, then all the times that was overstepped before or you felt ignored, those emotions are still going to be there until you start working through them. And you can do that on your own before you're even in contact with the person or the situation you are offering it in. So I have a catchphrase that'll help you rehearse it to own it. So rehearse it. It's so important. It's called pre-paving energetically as well. You're going to work out the kinks so that when it comes time, you still may feel nervous. You still might have queasy stomach. You still might be sweating under your clothes, but you're already familiar with the words that feel the strongest and most confident in your body. So that's why the practicing out loud is important and why it's important to say the same thing in different ways. Practice saying it short and concise so that you can feel the difference in your body. The next tip, there's two more, is state the boundary the same way as much as possible. So be consistent and be like a parrot. Once you've discovered the words that feel the best and help you feel the strongest, say it over and over again. Say it over and over again. You might just repeat it to the person or to the situation. Don't break your own boundary. Move through the discomfort, the guilt, the temptation to go back to the old pattern, because that will come up. Full disclosure on that, full transparency. It's not going to be like, oh, I have this new boundary and I know exactly what I'm going to say and it's going to be easy breezy. Not usually at first, but it will get easier and it will strengthen your capacity to use your voice and feel better about honoring yourself in that way. So the last tip is to take out a few sets of words if you find these showing up in your statements. Take out, I just, fill in the blank. I need you to, fill in the blank. I hope it's okay, fill in the blank. If you don't mind, fill in the blank. Take those out. They are not going to help in your boundary declaration. They are going to lead to a question and they are disempowering in their nature. So the people pleasers out there, those in the good girl syndrome, folks with guilt complexes, when you start declaring and reframing your boundaries and embodying them, you will tend to feel like you're being cold and uncaring and bad about being so clear and direct. And I'm here to reassure you, you are not. It's that you are just not used to honoring yourself and hearing your voice in such an empowered way and in such a self-protective way. You are not rejecting anybody else by honoring yourself. You are finally giving yourself the same respect and the same space as you have given others for so long. So I hope that you will go back and re-listen to this episode and re-listen to the tips. Write them down, or if you really want to dive deep into this and this is something big you struggle with, reach out to me. I do work one-on-one with this, and we can connect online. We can connect in person. I do both. Doing this alone can feel big at times. And another option is gathering with others while you're making these changes. It's so key to know that we're not alone in this. And I can tell you from the very first episode that I've launched, so many women have already reached out to me saying, I felt like you were telling my story. I felt like, despite the circumstances being slightly different, that you were completely talking to me and talking about me. So I am sure many of you listening to this episode are feeling that way right now. I take women through different written exercises, role plays, embodiment practices. There is such a profound awareness of what's holding them back, what's holding you back from creating and being able to stay true to better boundaries. These practices are also so effective at unveiling the emotions that have not been fully processed that are connected to the boundaries. Inner child wounding that might be there, where there has been internalized misogyny that's blocking your sovereign choice and the capacity to protect yourself through your boundaries. When women gather together, they create a safe space for one another to share honestly and authentically. And this normalizes their need to express, to hear, and to see themselves in one another. And to awaken more to where they are not creating healthy boundaries or following through on them and keeping themselves in a cycle of self-abandonment and disempowerment. So connect either with a group or get some individual support, whether you feel drawn to traditional counseling or coaching or experiences that are more in the field of energy or shamanic work, in combination with this can really help both your thought process, your mindset, and your energy field to integrate the changes you're trying to make. And with that, I'm going to close our episode in sharing that in our next episode, I'm going to have a very special guest. This is my Moon Mana Celtic Women's Circle mentor, Dr. Karen Ward. And she will be with us all the way from Dublin, Ireland. And this episode is Why Women Gather. Karen and I will be discussing why women gathering together for spiritual exploration, healing, and growth is essential to our well-being. So much more juice for us to discover with that, and I'm so excited to have her with us. So be sure to join me for the next episode, Why Women Gather. Episodes drop every second Friday. Mark your calendar. Please follow and share widely with those that you love and think will benefit. Check out my website, Instagram and Facebook feeds, online courses, and all of the rest of the resources that are there for you, for your healing journey. It's time, my sisters, to elevate your mind, expand your feminine heart, explore your inner wisdom. Let's soar together. Sending you all big, big love.
This is Story Studio Network.